you would think, well, I said yes to Jesus, I'm saved, I automatically have freedom. You do, we do. We have that freedom. But I find a lot of Christians don't know how to stay free. And I think that is the conundrum, the pickle, the problem, the troubles that we see, not just in our own personal walks with God, but then we look around and see our family, and even, within the life of the church and our nation, that is supposed to be land of the free, but really is it? And are we actually experiencing all of the freedom that God won for us on the cross? Are we actually walking in that? And so I think we have to recognize that we need freedom, right? And it's that whole idea. People talk about fake it till you make it. And I think some of those who faked it until they made it are still faking it because they haven't made it, right? They're still living in that false reality of having made it, and we have to fake. They're faking it. They're faking not to have made it, and so there is no fake it till we make it. There is no put it on this facade of happiness and joy and victory. And when the inside we're wrestling with God, we're wrestling with ourselves. We're wrestling to understand how God is moving and where God is taking us. And because we do that, a lot of times instead of walking forward, we kind of freeze. Right? And we stay in this stagnant place that does not allow us to experience freedom. The truth is, we all have a history. And some of which, we can take pride in, and some we can't, or we shouldn't, right? And no matter what our past looks like, it always has this looming effect to keep us ineffective, and it even binds us in a way that makes moving forward difficult. Right? It's like whether they're triumphs or trials or failures that we've had in our past, it doesn't matter, because if they're victories, if there's things that we've done that have been great, we look back and we think about how great those times were and how good I did and how blessed I was at the time, and we're not looking forward. We're not able to move forward because we're stuck in the past, and even with our past failures and our hurts. Those have a tendency just to bind us up. And so we walk with a limp. Remember, Jacob walked with a limp. And it's not the same kind of limp. Jacob walked with a limp because he wrestled with God. And then that was a reminder of his struggle with God and how he was living for himself and not living for God. But we walk with limps because we're wrapped up in our past. Right? And for some way, somehow, like it's a little bit loose around our legs, so we can kind of walk. We seem like we're moving forward with stride, but actually we're not moving forward with a gait that inspires victory. That inspires us to actually understand and know that we're living in freedom, but we continually think we're moving forward. In order for us to move forward and walk into our future of freedom, we have to unwrap ourselves. Unwrap ourselves like Lazarus. Remember Lazarus, Jesus' friend in John chapter 11. You can look at that, John chapter 11. And remember, this was one of Jesus' good friends that he would stay at Lazarus' house all the time on his journeys, right? He'd stop in the midpoint where Lazarus lived. And he would stay with his sister. He would stay with his sisters, Martha and Mary, and they came to him and said, "Jesus, Lazarus is dying. Come and pray, lay hands on him so that he won't die." And Jesus did it. And then 4 days later, he finally gets to Lazarus, but Lazarus has already been in the tomb, right? He's already died, and they've already wrapped him in his grave clothes. And in verse 44 it says, as Jesus calls out to Lazarus, it says, Lazarus, come forth. Out of a great emotion, right? This is where Jesus was crying for his friend. And he's saying, Lord, I'm doing this so that people can understand who I am through you. And so he calls out, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus, who's already been dead. Lazarus, who, but for who God was, would have stayed in that state. But because Jesus called him out by name, it says in verse 44, the dead man came out. His hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus had to tell him, here comes this dead guy. And I'm sure everyone's like, bro, what just happened here? Like, this is not natural. This shouldn't be happening. What's going on? Whatever the questions are, he had to tell him, unwrap him. Unwrap him and let him go. Why? Because he wasn't freed yet. Even though he was awake, even though his eyes were open, even though he was breathing air in his lungs, he still wasn't free. And so that can be our state at times. Just because we've said yes to God doesn't mean that we walk in the true freedom that he's given us.
Yeah, good.
The question is, you have to ask yourself, are my grave clothes still on? Are my grave clothes still on? Because here's the reality. Even if it's just hanging onto your ankle. You know those guys that walk out of the bathroom, they still got toilet paper on their shoe. It's disgusting. But it's that disgusting, the fact that we are not walking in, that's the disgusting part that attaches itself to our lives. Even if it's just one strand of grave clothes, because you know what? He's in that grave, he was in that tomb for days. So you know what it had to smell like. You know what he had to smell like. They didn't have the treatment that they have today. This guy was rotting already. And so we leave those rotting bits of clothes on as we try to walk into our freedom. No. I find it interesting here where it says his face wrapped in a headcloth. You know, we can move about as much as we want. We can be free and we can be able to grab and run and look at, pull all these things over here and run as fast as we can into our freedom. But if our head is wrapped up, if we can't see, if our mind isn't the mind of Christ, but our mind is still wrapped up in grave clothes, are we really free? Because the battle is for our mind, right? That's what Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says it's the God of this world that has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that they will not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. You say, well, he's talking about unbelievers. But I'm saying to you, if you haven't truly allowed God to set you free, do you truly automatically believe? Are you walking in the belief and the freedom of what God has won? Even if you can move your arms. Tell you what, go to youth camp, get fired up, say yes to God, but then come back down the mountain and let's see how you live. All right, go to Beloved, get touched by God, and then come home with the dirty kitchen, and let's see how you actually live. Guys, don't do that. If your wives go, make sure the house is clean when they come back. But are we truly believing? Just because we make a decision to say yes to God doesn't mean that we're actually living out the call of God on our lives in a believing manner. Think about Exodus. Think about the children of Israel coming out of Exodus, right? You think about it, Exodus is a carryover of Genesis. It's just the beginning, what's going on. And Exodus opens with the, Genesis ends, talks about Joseph, and then in the beginning of Exodus, it talks about where the children of Israel are, and you get a glimpse of how long the children of Israel have been in bondage, right? Because you start reading, and it starts giving you a little bit of a timeline. So 430 years now, these guys are enslaved, right? And the first half of Genesis, Exodus describes how Moses is leading the Israelites out of Egypt. And there's these miraculous deliverances that are happening, right? All these plagues are going on. Moses throwing his staff on the ground and becoming snakes, and then eating the other snakes, and turning the water into blood. All these different things are happening. Right? And these are all miraculous initiatives by the Holy Spirit to deliver the children of Israel. Can I tell you something? We've been delivered. The miracles that it took for you to say yes to God, you may not even be able to recognize them. But there were initiatives that God had taken, one after the other, that were miraculous for you to be able to see, to get the blindfolds off the eyes of your mind, to be able to say yes to God. Why on earth will we start to raise that blindfold back up again? 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10 says, He has delivered us. That's past tense. Good. And he's talking to Christians. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril. Talking about hell, your eternity in hell. He's delivered you from such a deadly peril, and He will deliver us again. He's talking about when Jesus comes back, He's going to deliver us again. But he says in the next sentence, on Him we have set our hope that He will continue to deliver us. See, there's a continuance that happens as we say yes to God. There's today, I say yes, but then tomorrow I've got to wake up and say yes again. Yeah. And I've got to experience the delivering power of the presence of God in my life. Yeah. Good. And then the next day I have to experience the delivering power of Jesus in my life. And then the next day, and then the next day, I have to experience it. Yeah. Why? Because He will deliver us. He will. It says, set your hope that He will continue to deliver us. I think about these guys and the Israelites, and God makes this great promise to Abraham. I'm going to make your descendants like the sand, like the stars. You're going to be a great nation. And all of a sudden now they end up in slavery. That doesn't sound great. Although they grew in numbers, right? They continued to grow and become a great number of people. They were not a great nation. They were just people in chains making bricks to build pyramids or whatever. God prepares us for our deliverance by showing us repeatedly that we cannot rely on our own physical strength and our own mind. So good. Think about it. I mean, the Israelites outnumbered probably the Egyptians, and that's why they got afraid. And that's why they're like, man, we got to put these guys in slavery and make sure they're doing what we want, because they're outnumbering us. In their own strength, if they would have put their mind to it, they probably could have taken over Egypt. But they didn't, and God didn't allow them to. God wanted to show who He was in their lives, not what they could do without Him. Because even in their own strength, they probably would have messed it up anyways. I mean, you guys get the parallel. You're laughing at them, but I'm talking about us. I mean, how many of us have tried to do it our own way, or even are trying that right now, to do it our own way? It astonishes me, And I'm not just talking about you, I'm talking about me. How we can say yes to God, and then we can say yes to God on one day and then spend the rest of our lives trying to do it our own way. Mm-hmm. And people will say, oh man, you just want fire insurance. I get that. I get that phrase. But it's not just people are saying, I want fire insurance. I just want to make sure I get into hell. No one's thinking that. I mean, heaven. Whatever. We're doing No one's thinking that. I just want to get in there. I just want to skirt my way into heaven. No one's thinking that. Everyone's thinking, I'm going to say yes to God because I want to go to heaven, but now I'm going to I have this issue, I have this problem in my life. I have this repeating problem in my life. How can I fix it? Instead of, man, Lord, I have this repeating problem in my life. I need you to help me fix it. And here's like the rub of it, right? Is because God can say, I see your repeating problem, but you're not ready for me to fix it yet. Think about it. He could have Israel didn't have to go into slavery, but he put them into slavery for 430 years. Jesus, on the cross, they're mocking him. If you're the Son of God, get down. He could have. But there was an end result that he had to see happen in order for us to live in the life that we have now, so he had to stay. Well, I don't like that. I don't like it either. I don't. There are things that I've been praying for years and decades, and I haven't seen God come through with them yet. But that doesn't mean that God's not real. That doesn't mean that God hasn't said it. I just have to understand that God is sovereign, and he knows more than what I know. It's unsettling, and it's frustrating. And sometimes I get angry about it. Because, man, okay, Lord, I'm serving you. I'm doing all these things. I'm being where you told me to be, when you told me to be there, and I'm still waiting. Remember, the disciples asked Jesus, is it now that you've resurrected, now that you're truly God, you've raised yourself from the dead, and we're ready to go, is it now that you're gonna restore the kingdom to Israel? And Jesus said, it's not for you to know the times and the dates that the Father has set. You realize that, on average, we'll get like 75 something years, right? Something like that, on average. That's not a very long time. Right? When I turned 25, I started thinking 40's not that old. 15 years from now, I'm more than halfway there. And then you start getting older in age, and you start realizing, man, this is a short time that I've had. And you think about that in the spectrum of the entire universe and what God is trying to orchestrate. And even though we get frustrated because it's not happening in our time frame and when we want it, God has something larger looming. He has something bigger that he's trying to work out in the kingdom. And our lives are a part of the kingdom. We want our lives to be the kingdom, but they're a part of the kingdom. Can we just settle this right now? You don't know. You don't know. I don't know. God knows. And if we can live in that understanding, like, I don't know, God, but I'm going to believe you anyways. This is not me trying to just get into heaven. I'm just going to choose to believe that you know better than I know. We can settle that in our own hearts. Then it doesn't dull our senses. All right? We don't check our brains at the door and just say, well, whenever you want to, God. No, we still pray and we still believe and we still earnestly understand that God is sovereign in the scheme of things, but it allows us to move forward in freedom when we don't have to have all the answers, because I don't have all the answers. None of us have all the answers, but God has them. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us. We have to set our hope on Jesus, that he will continually deliver us. I think the mistake that the disciples made was, the mistake that Israelites made when they're in bondage and coming out of bondage and doing all the different things that they were doing, was that they sought God to do the big thing. But they forgot that it's all the little things that make up the big thing. And so they looked to God for the big things, but then they started looking to themselves for the little things. Because God's not interested in that. God's not worried about that. God doesn't care about that, but actually he does. He does. And he cares about us so much because it's the little things that build up our faith for the big things. And if we can give ourselves to the little things and give those things to God and trust God for the little things, then when the big things come, then now we're actually seeing God come through and we can walk in more freedom. There's more hope and there's more understanding for what God wants to do in us because we've trusted him for the little things. And not just look to ourselves. You know, it's not up to the people that we see in the world to determine what we know or believe. It's not up to, you know, the Christian memes that we read, right? It's not up to even the pastors that we might see on social media or whatever, and it's not even up to me. What we have to determine is what we know has to be based off of what God has said. Not what other people are doing, not what other people are saying, but what God has said. The world is doing its job. The world is doing its job. But if we focus on the world, we're going to get caught up. You know, I stopped watching the news. And I just started reading TikTok. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I get all my news from social media. No, I just stopped watching the news because it was toxic. And I'm going to let this, bobblehead tell me. What? I'm sorry. What do you call it? Not bobblehead. Talking head. Same thing. I'm gonna let them tell me how I should feel. Because they're not telling me what I should know. They're telling me how I should feel. That's right. And now my feelings, I'm getting angry. My feelings are, this is not working right. My feelings are, you better get out of my face. But if I'm living by my feelings and I'm not giving God enough glory for him to speak to me, for me to live by his word, not by what other people are telling me. The world is doing its job. You read Genesis 6 and it talks about how the world is depraved. It's 6 chapters in. And the world is depraved. How is that? And then you read in Isaiah and he talks about how the world is depraved. And then you go and read in Romans and they were all depraved. Right? And nothing has changed. The world is still depraved. Why? Because the world is doing its job based on its master. Jesus didn't come here to steal, kill, and destroy. The enemy did. And so now what he's doing, he's stealing joy, he's stealing happiness, he's stealing patience, he's stealing unity. He's destroying it, utterly destroying it. And he's making us crazy. Why? Because that's what his job is. His job is to make the world unsettled. But you know where depravity should not exist? Is amongst us. We should be the last people depraved. That shouldn't even enter into our thought process of being so outrageously angry and so frustrated that you want to just punch a wall. That shouldn't be us. Good. And I'm telling you right now, that is not us living in freedom. And it's not the freedom that the world is telling us. Can I tell you something? I love my country, but this is not true freedom that we live in. This is not true freedom, and we have this idea of what freedom is based on what a piece of paper tells us freedom is. The pursuit of happiness is not freedom. Freedom is found when you have Jesus leading and guiding your life.
Come on.
Freedom is found when you're living in the progress of what God has called you to.
Good.
Freedom is found in the presence of the living God.
Yeah.
It won't always look like what we want. Think about it. Children of Israel, they're like, come on, Moses is like, let's go. We're out of here. They say, okay, cool. And then they get to the Red Sea, and they're like, dude, we could have stayed in Egypt. Now we're going to die. And so then, what does God do, though? He makes a way. He makes a way. Dude, we're passing down these stories about Abraham and him and Jacob and Isaac. And all of a sudden, here we are in bondage. It doesn't look like what we think it should. We want God to put things in a nice, neat package. We want to make him orderly. But let me ask you a question. Is God messy or are we messy? I don't think God is messy. But we live in a world that is completely messed up. And it's run by people that are messed up. And it's led by the most messed up. Doesn't look like what we want. You know, we went to Hawaii for our anniversary, and I've never snorkeled. I've only seen people do it on TV. And I think, how hard can it be? You just put this mask on, you put this thing in your mouth, and you just get in the ocean and you swim. I did not know how to snorkel. And I almost died. Like 3 times. No, I'm not being dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm in the middle of the ocean, sucking in water, thinking, how am I going to live? I'm too far from shore, and my feet are not going to touch the ground. That's why my worst fear is drowning. My worst fear is dying by drowning. How about you put the thing on and then you swam? And you're looking at the thing, and I'm like, I'm dying. I'm so out of breath. I can't even understand. You're supposed to sit there. I can just look. I just want to do stuff. There's a technique to snorkeling. There's rules to snorkeling. There's a technique to living this life of a Christian.
That's good.
It doesn't look like what we think it should sometimes, but that's what it is. There's a technique to it. The technique is on my knees with my hands lifted high. But that's not doing something. That's doing the most.
Yeah.
That's doing the most. It was so funny. And the last time I tried to go snorkeling, I jumped in the water and these people were like, oh my God. They got all their stuff and they left. They thought, oh, he's going to die all the way around. And my wife, who has snorkeled before, is not giving me any instructions. No help. She's like 400 feet away from me, like just living her best. Wow. But don't we do that to each other? We do that to each other. Oh, that guy's struggling. You see that guy struggling? Man, I don't know what his problem is. He needs Jesus. We do that. We do that to each other. And that is bringing the world's depravity into the church.
Wow.
Listen, I need as much help as you need, right? To live this life. That's why the Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another.
Come on, babe.
We need each other not to live in that state. But here's the thing. We got to realize, we have to recognize and admit and be humble enough to say, I don't know it all. I don't know. Someone's trying to break in. Listen. Open the door. forget that there's an enemy that preys on our weaknesses. If you're an intellectual, the devil's going to come at you through intellect. If you're emotional, he's going to come at you through your emotions. If finances are a big deal to you, he's going to come at you through finances. He attacks us through our weaknesses. And then there's God. He doesn't attack us, but he has wisdom, and he has all the wisdom, and he places things in our paths that help us depend on him and point toward him, right? And we have to understand how sovereign God is. And even though we may not understand it, he's still sovereign. Even though we don't get it, he's sovereign. And then there's God's grace, right? And so there's some of us that think, oh, well, I've said yes to Jesus, now I can live how I want to because of the grace of God. He'll forgive me anyways. That's abuse. That's the abuse of God's grace. But you don't understand. Like, living the life that I came out of, it's hard for me to live this life that God's called me to live because you're living it the way that you think you should instead of relying on God. When we rely on God, then he gives us the tools and the grace and the people around us and the wisdom enough not to live in that space anymore. The more we choose ourselves, the more we stay stuck in this pattern of being in bondage. And as we continue, as we just move in our lives and we allow God to take the throne room of our heart, then we find ourselves not wrapped in grave clothes anymore. Romans 6:1 says, Paul's writing to these guys, and he says, what shall I say then? Shall we continue to sin so that grace may increase? That's not the idea. God's grace isn't there for us to sin more. God's grace is there so we can recognize sin and run away from it. Now remember, sin isn't the single act. Sin is us missing the mark. So what has God said to you? What has God called you to? And are you hitting that mark? Good. Because if you're not hitting that mark, then you're sinning. Right? It isn't just a single act. Yeah, we do sin and whatever. But the idea is, bro, we're missing the mark. What did God say? He wants us to live in freedom, but we're missing the mark of freedom. We keep getting off target, until eventually we just stop trying. We want to walk in freedom, not under the influence of our grave clothes, but delivered and continuously delivered. It says we set our hope in him. That set our hope in the Greek is elpidzo. I found the phonetic spelling. Elpidzo. And it's a verb. It is to expect or to hope for. I hope for, I expect, I trust that God is going to do what he said he'll do. That what he says, I'll be able to live in that space because he's going to make a way for me. If he's not making a way, then why would I trust him? But we see that he constantly makes a way. He made a way for his own son. Yeah. Why wouldn't he make a way for us? There's no deliverance without our action, right? Elpizo, that's a verb. That means it's an action word, right? Let me take you back to 8th grade English. It's an action word. That means we actually have to do something. Our hope has to be backed up by action. We can't just say, I'm trusting God, and then not do anything about it. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to hope in God, but we're not actually doing anything about it. Mm-hmm. Well, what can I do? Get on your knees and pray. Right. Oh, I need finances. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good. Action. Trust God. Hope for. Believe in. There is no deliverance without action on our part. Lazarus had to walk out of the grave. Yeah. Lazarus had to walk out of the grave. The children of Israel had to walk through the Red Sea. Jesus had to walk out of the tomb. We had to say yes for the forgiveness of our sins, but we have to continue to say yes, to be continually delivered into freedom. I know it's not as easy as it sounds. I can talk about it all day. I know it's not easy. That's why we have each other. That's why we have the Holy Spirit, first of all, that we rely on, that we trust in, that we ask for strength from. And then he puts other people in your life to be able to help you walk it out. And that's the goal, is to walk into freedom, be delivered into freedom. And God gives us this example, right? Remember, God writes the Bible to people, but he wrote it for us. Why leave that in there? Why leave that whole story about Israel in there, having to go through all that bondage and then walk out into being delivered? Why? So that we could see, if God's doing it there, he can do it here. If God did it then, he can still do it now. We just have to walk it out and trust and put our hope in him. Will you bow your heads with me this morning?